Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Les doy la bienvenida en nombre de Filba. Estamos muy contentas con tener el privilegio de tener esta clase uno a uno con Mircea Cartarescu. Agradecemos al Malva, a la Universidad Diego Portales de Chile, que permitió particularmente que Mircea Cartarescu pueda estar hoy acá. Él va a dar una clase conversada, que es como escribo. Ustedes saben que el tema de este año en Filba es la máquina humana, donde tratamos de revisar procesos creativos. Tratamos de proponer a los escritores que nos visitan y a las escritoras que rebobinaron un poco, que miraran la obra propia y que hicieran el ejercicio de rebobinar para así poder ver qué había pasado en ese proceso. Así que también le hicimos esta invitación a Mircea Cartarescu. Nos da nuevamente mucho placer y muchísima alegría que lo haya pensado, que lo haya hecho y que esté acá para cortarnos cuál es su proceso de escritura. Lo va a presentar Lala Toutonián. Lala Toutonián es periodista cultural, es escritora, es parte del equipo de Filba, es una gran lectora de la obra de Cartarescu, así que ella lo va a presentar. Les agradezco muchísimo. Ahora sí, un aviso técnico. Quienes se queden después para la entrevista con Jonathan Franzen y tengan aparatitos de traducción, no los devuelvan. Lo que sí, tenemos que salir del auditorio y después volver a ingresar, ¿sí? Bueno, ahora sí, los dejo. Disfruten muchísimo de esta clase junto a Mircea Cartarescu. Gracias.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Les cuento un poco, ya sabrán, por supuesto, para los que están acá, del estilo narrativo de Mircea Cartarescu, que es el tema del que nos va a hablar hoy. Es un tema, como bien sabemos, de particular interés en la literatura contemporánea. Cartarescu es uno de los escritores más influyentes, no solo de Rumania, sino del mundo entero. Y se le atribuye una distinción única, justamente, que combina con rica complejidad elementos del realismo, la fantasía, el onirismo y la introspección psicológica. Es uno de los escritores más influyentes de su generación que ha contribuido significativamente en la literatura contemporánea, europea y mundial. La obra de Cartarescu se erige como un corpus literario de profunda relevancia en el ámbito de la literatura. Su producción literaria abarca diversos géneros, va desde la poesía hasta la narrativa y se caracteriza por una experimentación estilística audaz y una exploración constante de las dimensiones más profundas de la experiencia humana. Uno de los rasgos distintivos de su escritura, justamente, es el enfoque en la exploración de la mente humana y la experiencia subjetiva. Sus personajes, como bien sabemos, a menudo se sumergen en reflexiones filosóficas sobre la vida, la identidad, la memoria y la realidad. Este aspecto de su estilo puede resultar en una prosa virtuosa, claramente, de alta contingencia, despojada de barroquismo de todos modos y, sin embargo, plagada de una exuberante potencia. Otro aspecto importante de su estilo es el uso de la intertextualidad y la metaficción. Cartarescu a menudo incorpora referencias literarias, históricas y culturales en su obra, lo que enriquece sus escritos y juega con las convenciones narrativas tradicionales, desafiando de esta manera las expectativas del lector, como sabemos, y jugando con las estructuras tradicionales de la literatura, una experimentación formal y un enfoque innovador. En sus obras utiliza una variedad de técnicas literarias como la fragmentación narrativa y la alternancia de géneros. Un ejemplo notable de su elegancia ficcional se encuentra en Solenoide, acaso su obra más reflexiva, que lo posicionó como uno de los mejores escritores europeos contemporáneos. Aquí vemos en esta novela, justamente en términos de lenguaje, su prosa poética más enraizada y su habilidad para crear imágenes vívidas y evocadoras. Su estilo a menudo se caracteriza por una rica descripción de escenarios y emociones, lo que contribuye a la intensa atmósfera de la novela. Aquí utiliza una estructura, como decía, fragmentaria y una narración en espiral para explorar distintas formas de tiempo, de la memoria y la naturaleza elusiva de la realidad. Esta novela es un ejemplo destacado de la habilidad de Mircea Cartarescu para desafiar las convenciones narrativas y llevar al lector a un viaje literario profundo y reflexivo. Otro título significativo es, por supuesto, la trilogía Segador, una obra monumental que se destaca por su estilo barroco y su exploración de la identidad, la historia y la mitología rumana, a través de una prosa densa y muy rica en metáforas. Cartarescu teje una narrativa compleja que abarca desde su historia familiar hasta la de su Rumania natal. En lugar de ver la infancia y la juventud como un obstáculo para el arte de la novela, Cartarescu la celebra repetidamente como el periodo más rico en la vida de sus personajes. En su mundo, esta época se distingue por una mayor capacidad para penetrar en un reino más profundo, a menudo mágico, en lugar de un lapso de miopía egocéntrica. En lugar de ser un mal necesario en la condición humana, la nostalgia del autor proporciona un incentivo clave para crear. Aquí se aprecia una de las facetas más notables de su obra, la habilidad para trascender los límites convencionales de la escritura, fusionando elementos de lo real y lo onírico en una amalgama única. El autor despliega una narración que se balancea entre la autoficción y la fantasía, explorando su propia infancia y su juventud en Rumania, mientras se sumerge en un mundo de sueños y de mitos. Cartarescu utiliza un sentido altamente poético y una prosa deslumbrante para tejer esta narrativa que desafía todas las convenciones, como decíamos antes, y la poesía es un lugar muy significativo en su producción literaria. Allí revela una sensibilidad lírica y una maestría en el uso del lenguaje que ha sido ampliamente elogiada en todo el mundo. Sus poemas exploran temas que van desde la nostalgia y la melancolía hasta la belleza efímera de la vida cotidiana. Su estilo poético se caracteriza por un lenguaje rico en imágenes y metáforas, así como una profunda reflexión de la existencia humana y la condición del individuo en un mundo en constante cambio. En resumen, el estilo narrativo de Mircea Cartarescu se caracteriza por su profundidad psicológica, su prosa poética, la intertextualidad y su disposición a desafiar las normas narrativas convencionales. Sus escritos invitan a adentrarse en un mundo de sueños y reflexiones que trascienden las barreras de tiempo y espacio. Un autor fundamental cuya obra seguirá siendo objeto de estudio y admiración tanto en el ámbito académico como literario por mucho tiempo por venir. Me voy a adelantar a lo del estilo que seguramente va a contarnos él, pero ayer en la entrevista que hizo con Juan José Becerra en la Alianza Francesa comentaba, por ejemplo, que él escribe a mano todos los días, les voy a spoilear, me adelanto, por la mañana, no corrige, no edita, y hasta acá digo, para que se explaye aquí Mircea Cartarescu.
Thank you so much, dear Lala, because of your fantastic insight into my humble work. I don't know if I deserve so many praises that you showed towards what I do. On the other hand, you were so exact and so smart in everything that you said that now I feel obliged to be even smarter than you are, which is impossible for me. Usually the introduction should be lesser than the book that follows, but this time I think it will be the other way around. Besides, you gave a kind of a spoiler of the things that I wanted to tell the public in the first place. So now I have to think of other things interesting that I could invent or remember to tell the public about what I do and what is my job in this world. Thank you so much anyway. And now I want to say good evening to you all. I'm really very flattered that you came in so large number to meet with us and to share the pleasure of talking about the most interesting subject in the world: literature, poetry, prose, essays, everything that makes the charm of our of this wonderful art of the words. Thank you so much for being here. And now I hope you do not expect a conference. I won't give you a conference, but a simple talk, a very sincere and modest talk. And my only hope is to be on the same wavelength, to understand not from only one direction, but bi-directional, to have a interactive session of speaking about literature. So I expect your good vibes that I can feel very, very well, like an actor that is playing on the stage, and also your questions. Anytime you feel the need to ask me something, please raise your hand or do something else. Please stand if you don't like to raise your hand. It remembers you too much of your school years. Nevertheless, I would be very happy to talk with you. Now, I want to tell you some things that are banal, not very high, not very intellectual, but very important for me when talking about literature, talking about what I want to do in this field. The first thing that I want to tell you is that in literature there are some artificial distinctions between things that actually they are not distinct, they are together. For example, the distinction between the art of the reading and the writing. Reading and writing seem two different things, but actually they are only one, or they are very, very much connected to each other. No writer only writes or simply writes a phrase, a paragraph, and so on, but he is writing/reading all the time. During the process of writing, the writer also reads each and every word that he writes. He reads and rereads it. He makes decisions all the time because of reading process that he has to do. Another distinction that we make, but which is not so strong, is between the writer and the reader. We consider that the book, in a way, is only the product of the writer, and the reader is a passive element which has no contribution or very little contribution to the book. It is not a good thing to have this image. It's like the old medieval concept which said that only the man gives the semen, while the woman only gives the womb. So she is a passive receiver of the semen in the process of reproduction. It's the same prejudice when you consider the writer and the reader. Actually, the reader also gives the spiritual, intellectual semen, which contributes to the creation of the book. In a way, the book is the child which is born between the writer and the reader. It is the product of a love affair between the writer and the reader. No one is a passive one. All of them, both of them, contribute to the unique being which is a book. A writer gives, in a way, the DNA of the book. He or she creates a sort of a structure with hangers, with lots of hangers, where the reader puts its own cloth in a way. For example, a writer could start his book by saying, "It was a beautiful evening." When the reader receives this phrase, he cannot imagine the evening the writer was referring to, an event in the writer's life. You cannot get into the writer's mind to see what image of that evening he had. You substitute it with your own image, with your own memories, with your own life. So you contribute to half of each and every phrase of the book. This is why no book is the same with the same book that is read by another one. Each one of us read other book, even if it's called the same, even if it contains the same words. But we contributed with our flesh, with our blood, with our thinking, with our memories to this book. So it is half ours. It is like a child between the writer and the reader. And there are many other things that we struggle to understand in the process of reading, writing, that we have in the case of a book. The book is only a code. It's a dead code. It cannot be. It cannot exist without a receiver, without the reader. If we write a book and send it in space, the book doesn't exist at all. A book only exists when it meets the receiver, the reader. And reading actually is, I would say that it's a bigger part of my life than writing. Before being a writer, I have always been a great reader. I have been an omnivorous reader. Most of the writers that you will meet will tell you that they read a lot of books, but they were referring to books of literature. Most of the writers read only books of literature. They live inside a small sphere where there are poems, there are novels, there are, I don't know, epic poems and so on, which they are proud to have read. Some of them read lots of books, walls of libraries. But I'm not of this kind. I read everything that I can find. I'm obsessed with reading. I'm a maniac of reading, and I have always been like that. I remember when I was a child, when I learned how to read, and I learned how to read backwards because my father was bringing his newspapers and spread them on the table. It was a newspaper about sports. He was a great fan of our football teams, and he bought a sports newspaper. And he was reading it on the other side of the table in a normal way. But I stayed on the other, next to him, on the other part of the table, and I learned to read backwards. I read the words backwards and the letters, and this was for a certain period the normal way that I read newspapers. And when I found the first books in my home, I also started to read them backwards. I kept them the other way around. It's a bit funny, but I remind you that we also see backwards. All of us see the image backwards because we have the crystalline in our eye, which makes the image upside down, and only comparing it to our feeling of gravity is turning the image the other way with the head above and the feet under it. So it's only a thing of habit, a long habit that makes us see in a normal way. It was the same with my reading at the beginning. The first memory in my life shows me with a book in front of me. I could not read by that time. I was only 2 years old, and I remember very clearly, very precisely, that one day I was sitting in the lap of my mother, and she was keeping a very big illustrated book for children in front of us, and she was reading for me from this book. And after that, if I think of myself at different ages, I always find myself reading. As I told you, I didn't read only books. When I went to the toilet and forgot to take a book with me, I read the etiquettes on the detergent boxes and so on. So I read everything was written. I read things that were written on the walls, things that were written on the T-shirts of the people, and so on. So everything that is written attracts me like a magnet. And from my youth, I never read only literature, as I told you. Maybe a quarter of what I read in my life is literature. I read sciences in the first place. I'm a very curious person, and I have a lot of hobbies. One of my hobbies is sciences. It's biology, it's medicine, it's embryology, it's mathematics. It's quantum physics, for example. I'm a huge fan of the quantum physics physicists. I read philosophy, a lot of philosophy, more and more since I grew older. I read mystical things. I read the Zohar. I read the Bhagavad Gita. I read all the books of sapiens that we have from the old ages. I read the Bible, the whole Bible, each year. Not because I'm very much believer, but because the Bible is the greatest book of humanity. It's a huge novel. It's a huge novel. It's a huge book of poems. It contains lots of wisdom. But I also read other books like that. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is fundamental. It's the deepest insight in the depths of the human soul. It's about the afterlife. It's about resurrection and so on. So there are spiritual things. I read geometry, for example. Everything that I can get about some domains, some fields of geometry that I love a lot. Things that, for example, things that are connected with the extra dimensions of our space-time, the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension. All the mystics talked about them, but also the quantum physicists and also the people who are in charge with that, with certain domains of geometry. So I'm an omnivorous reader, and maybe from this hunger of reading, even the writer was born. Because as if you cannot write without reading, you cannot read without wanting to become a writer. And I had this wish from I was a child. I remember that, during my school, in the first years of school, I read the first books of literature, the Greek legends, for example, and some fairy tales of the Romanians and so on. And I thought to start writing. And when I was 9, I started writing my first novel. It lasted only for 9 pages. But nevertheless, they were the first pages that I have written in this domain of literature. In those pages, which are usually called prototexts, so what a writer gets to write before becoming a real writer, there are prototexts, and they are very interesting because many times you can find in them some features you will find in their real work. And I wrote about some characters who met met in a sort of a jungle, and they started to explore around. And at a certain moment, they found a clearance in the forest. And in the clearance, there was a cottage. And I remember that I wrote, the cottage looked like that. 2 points. And I thought, how could I describe the cottage? How should I start? From the soil, from the ground, or from the top of it? Should I first describe the door, the windows, the logs, or what? And I couldn't progress. I couldn't write a single word trying to describe that cottage. And finally I said, the cottage looked like that. And I drew it. I drew it. So it's obvious that my wish to write didn't match my power to describe, my power to make a dialogue, my power to give life to what I wanted to do. So I gave up for a while to write literature. And for a few years I felt better. But after that, when I was 12 or 13, I had another revelation. One of my colleagues started to write a sort of a poem. He only wrote two verses, but those verses were, well, they struck me. They struck me very hard. They were poems. They had rhythm. They had rhymes. They had prosody. I never read poetry till then. And these two verses started to obsess me. I understood that there is a sort of a way of speaking which is not like our normal speaking, but it's a magical one. It's a magical one. It's a magical one in the meaning that they produce in our mind a certain expectation, a certain state of enchantment. The rhythm, the rhymes, it was everything like how you call them, enchanting spell, like a spell. And I was terrified and very happy with them. And then I started to read poems, and of course I also started to write poems. And when I went to the college, I had a great luck there, because in my college there was a literary circle. I was very innocent by that time. I didn't know that the people could gather and could read their poems or their short stories, and they would comment on them and so on. I didn't know anything about the literary world, about writers, it was only the instinct in myself. I came from a rather poor milieu with no books in my house. So I was a sort of a virgin from this point of view. I was innocent. All my colleagues were better than I was. All of them read a lot, had an experience in writing poems or fiction or little sketches. I was listening to them. I was so happy to be with them. We had also a professor who was herself a writer, and she gave us the first indications of this job. She told us that literary is not only an art, but it's also a job. A job. Of course, you cannot learn to be a poet. You have to be born a poet. But there are some elements that you can learn, and they are very useful. So 4 years in my college, I stayed in that literary circle, and it was essential for me. It was essential. I learned the job of writing, which is very important. If you want to write, you know that you should read first, you should learn the basics of writing, and you should try to protect and enhance your talent as you have it. And at the end of this process, I could write. Not good poems, not necessarily original poems. You know, the writer is first, as Queneau said, a young monkey. The writer imitates the styles of the previous history of literature. It's like that law in biology, which says that during the development of the fetus in its mother's womb, the fetus repeats all the stages of the species. So at first it's like a fish, then like a frog, then like a lizard, and then like a mammal, like a monkey, and then he is born like a human being. maybe if the mother is waiting a bit more, an even more wonderful being could be born, an angel, for example. But usually mothers give birth to children, which is very nice. It's the same with the artist. It's normal that the artist imitate. You cannot become suddenly a writer or a poet. You have to know how to write in a classic manner, in a romantic manner, in a Baroque manner, in an avant-garde manner, in a surrealist manner, and finally in a modern manner, or even postmodern manner. All those styles have to be in yourself. You do not write with the knowledge that you have from your generation. You write with the whole history of literature, the whole history of poetry. The more knowledge a writer has, the better he will be. Many people say, and it's true, that even the most abstract painters actually can know how to paint a hand in a realistic way. Otherwise, they will not be able to paint abstract paintings. You have to go to check all the stages of your art to get to be yourself, to become yourself, because you are not independent. You are only the last step of a big stair. So I followed this recipe of becoming a writer in an instinctive way. I didn't know that I imitated. When I read a poet, I was so amazed with the new world that I discovered that I wrote like her or like him in a natural way. I didn't think that I imitated them. I thought that I discovered the ultimate poetry. I remember when I read Baudelaire for the first time, I wrote like Baudelaire for 3 or 4 months because I thought Baudelaire was the top of the top. No poetry can be better than or more modern than Baudelaire wrote. But after that, I discovered Ezra Pound, and I threw away Baudelaire, considering he was very old and without any interest, and I started to write like Ezra Pound. And then I discovered Allen Ginsberg, and I started to write like Allen Ginsberg. This mimetism is very important. Each and every youngster has to be mimetic or mimetic. Otherwise, I don't trust her or him, and I don't think they will become themselves. To become yourself, you have to imitate first. I don't know when I became myself. Actually, an artist should answer, I don't know, at each and every question, if he wants to be sincere. Now I remember an essay that Federico Garcia Lorca wrote about poetry. And it started like that. What is poetry? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows what is poetry. The most closer to the definition of poetry is saying that poetry is duende. He said duende, a sort of a fairy in a way. So a fantastic character which is never present. It's like a flame. It appears and disappears. You cannot put a finger on it. So you can have a whole poem without any duende, and another poem where the duende is in each verse. like in Garcia Lorca's fantastic poems. I love most his New York poems, his American poems. I think they are extraordinary. So I don't remember well when I started to write professionally. So when I started to write poetry, to publish it, because at first I was a poet. I never thought that I would in this life, I would write other things than poetry. When I was around 20, I ate poetry on bread, spread on bread, as we say. Everything for me was poetry. I was living in a dictatorship, in hunger, in cold, in terrible conditions. But me and my friends, who were also poets, didn't mind. They didn't mind. They wrote for taking pleasure from it. They were happy reading, I don't know, Cervantes, and they were unhappy reading Dostoevsky. They were happy when a colleague wrote a poem, and they were eager to go home and write an even better poem. We were living inside poetry. We are living inside poetry. Like any youngster, we had a great image of ourselves. We thought we were the best poets in the world. We compared ourselves because it was a small circle of 4 poets. We compared ourselves with the 4 Beatles. And we published a collection of poems called Air with Diamonds. From Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Beatles were our favorite musicians. And I remember that we fought all the time about the roles we had in the Beatles group. Everyone wanted to be John Lennon or Paul McCartney, but nobody wanted to be Ringo Starr. Although Ringo Starr will bury them all at the end. So we were absolutely happy. It was the happiest day, the happiest time of my life when we put the basis of what is called in our literature the generation of the 80s, or the blue jeans generation, because we were the people who brought the casual dressing in our culture. Till our time, the poets, the writers used to have costumes and cravat and ties and so on, and they were very, very tight. We were the people who brought in our small country the flower power movement, the liberation movements, the rock music. We were this kind of Woodstock wave in the Romanian poetry. And we wrote a very, very imaginative poetry. The common poem that we wrote was like that. It had influences from Europe, surrealistic and neo-avant-garde influences from the Romanian poetry and from the German, French poetry, but also beatnik influences. From the beat generation, from Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Korsov, Gary Snyder, and Ferlinghetti, from Frank O'Hara, and so on, which we combined. And the poems that we got were full of fantasy, full of life, full of imagination, full of irony and laughter. The people were laughing when they liked this kind of poems. This was the reaction. The previous poets from the previous generations wrote only about death, about unhappiness, about folly, about things like that, very grave things. We felt that this kind of poetry didn't fit our age, our joy of life. So we wanted to change the image of the Romanian poetry. And I think we did. My colleagues and I did a very nice poetry by that time, which is alive even today. The newest generations are still very fond of this kind of poetry written 40 years before. I was only a poet. I didn't think to write prose. I was happy with what I did. I succeeded to publish in the meantime, till I was 27 or 28, I succeeded to publish about 7 books of poetry, mutilated by the censorship and so on, but they could come out even in the communist period and the years after that. And I thought I would write poetry till the end of my life. And I was happy with that. But at a certain moment, which was crucial in my life, I discovered another continent. I was like Magellan, who discovered South America and so on, and was happy with that. So I discovered prose. I discovered a new job, a new continent, a new way of existing. Many people consider that poetry and prose are quite the same because they use words in this place and in the other place. But it's actually very different. It's like playing tennis and ping pong. You feel that they are quite similar, but actually they are extremely different, extremely different. It's a new job of writing prose. And I discovered prose because in my faculty there was not only this literary circle for poets, which was very famous, but also there was a very small, very silent, very reclusive, and very, how you say, exclusivist circle of prose writers, of young prose writers. And they were kind of snobbish. They did not accept almost anyone in this group. They were an esoteric group. They called themselves textualists because they gave up, they were avant-garde. They gave up writing poetry or prose or essays. They only wrote simply texts. And they were, of course, not very popular because they made experiments. And I became curious about them. And very timidly, I just started to go there, to go to that circle too. And suddenly, I understood that I was fond of what they did, that they were wiser and more experimented than the poets that were before around me. They had knowledge, a deep knowledge of the literary techniques. They were theorists. They knew a lot of literary theory. They read a lot. They were actually specialists of literature. And I loved it. And I loved it. I'm a kind of a crazy guy, but I also have this very reasonable side of myself. This side resonated with what they did. And they were writing their texts, and I was listening to them, and I thought at a certain moment to make them a gift, to show how much I respect them, how much I love them. They were a bit older than I was, 2 or 3 years older. So I wanted to astonish them in a way, to make them accept me. And I started my very first, I wrote my very first short story, which was The Roulette Player. Maybe some of you know it. It was my very, very first story that I wrote. I never wrote prose before. And of course, it was a literary toy. It was not a complex and elaborated story. It was quite linear. It was a parable, actually, in the steps of your Borges. In the steps of Borges. Borges was the main influence in this story. And I wrote this story very, very fast in a day or two, and I went to read it like an offer, like a mystical offer to those friends that I admire very well, very much. And to my surprise, they loved it. To my surprise, my heart was aching. I thought they will reject me. They will totally reject me. But they loved it. They said, well, it's not textualism, it's not a text, it's a story, but still we found something interesting in it. And this encouraged me a lot. I was very relieved, very encouraged, and I kind of thought to give up poetry and to turn to prose. It was a very hard decision for me, but anyway, I thought that I had written too much poetry. I wrote 7 volumes of poetry, and I thought, well, what am I going to do for 60 years, 70 years, 80 years that I could live? Well, only write poetry, only add the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, the 3rd volume of poetry. I knew poets that wrote over 30 volumes of poetry or over 40 volumes of poetry, only the first one being good, the others being repetitions, repeating themselves all the time. And I wondered, why did they do this thing? 7 volumes are enough, are okay. I showed what I could say in poetry. So I tried to escape poetry, leaving everything behind me, because I do this all the time. I never reread what I do. And starting another adventure, the adventure of prose, which is still the greatest adventure in my life. I love writing prose. It's my greatest joy. And I went on writing stories without thinking that I will make a book of them. They were separated stories. I continued with the second story in Nostalgia, and then with the third, and then with the first, and I ended with the 5th. So the stories in my first book of prose, Nostalgia, are in the order that I wrote them. And then at the end, one of those prose writers told me, but why don't you publish them all in a book? I never thought of that. I never saw Nostalgia like a book. And I said to myself, why not? And I gave Nostalgia to a publisher, and it stayed there for 4 years. So it was very hard to publish by that time because the censorship was very strong. There was a sort of a Orwell-like palace of censorship with several levels. So it was the first censor, the second censor, the third, till the one who was the president of this Council of Socialist Education, I think it was called. And each of them put a stamp a stencil on the first page of the book that they were reading. So after 4 years, nostalgia returned with 7 stamps on the first page. 7 people were reading them, and each of them took out some pages from it. So my first story, The Roulette Player, could not be published because they said it was too violent, too graphic. There was blood on the walls. They didn't like it. Although it was not political, but they didn't like this graphic side of it. And they took pages from all the other books. I have to tell you that by that time, each and every book was censored. Not only the books of literature, but also books of, well, cooking books were censored. The books for children were censored. Each and every book was censored because the censors had to show that they did their job for each book. Like the policemen who have to give fees, I don't know how you call them, for each car which is not parked as it should. I remember that in 87, Umberto Eco came to Bucharest, and the Writers' Union received him, and we, the young writers, were also present in the room. And at a certain moment, one of my colleagues, a very good poet and a very courageous one, stood and said, "Mr. Eco, do you know that from the name of the rose are 25 pages missing?" And it was a great scandal. It was a great scandal because the Writers' Union was communist, you know, it was very much controlled. And this youngster suffered some consequences. But Eco was very amazed and said, "But why? There's nothing directly political in my book. It's a sort of a monk thriller." And he was told after that each and every book, Romanian or foreigner, written by a foreigner, were censored. So my book was also censored like that. And after that, I started to take me seriously as a writer, and I went on writing prose, writing novels, writing stories, and so on. Of course, in the meantime, I wrote all other kinds of things. I wrote a lot of articles. After the revolution, I became a political and cultural journalist. I wrote a lot of articles. I became a lecturer at the university. So I wrote lots of books and studies on literature, academic books. I wrote all kinds of books, but my first thing was to write real, strong, powerful literature that will create a map of my brain. And not only a map of my brain, a map of myself, a map of my brain, of my body, of my wishes, of my past, my present, and my future. So in my mind, it has always been this idea that since I was born, I have to know everything about the world. I have to know everything around me and everything inside of me. I have to write with all the words that I know. I have to write about everything that I know, starting from the most humble things to the highest things, starting from turpitude, objection, even obscenity, to ideal worlds, to philosophy, to metaphysics, to religion, and so on. So I didn't want to let anything out of what I write. Sometimes I said that I want to make an arch between scatology and eschatology. So between the inferno, the hell, and the heaven. Of course, I do not dare and dream to compare myself with Dante Alighieri, but in a way, I had this ambition to describe exhaustively the world where I live, starting the other way around. First with the paradise, then with the purgatory, and then with the hell. And this is the way that I wrote my most important book, Cegador, or Bitor, or Blinding. The first volume is the paradise, the second is the purgatory, and the third is the hell of the history, the hell of the human condition. And now I get to the topic that was announced here, how I write. The way I write, don't you think that I forgot? But I don't think how much time we are left. Okay, so as Lala told you, the most important things are that I write by hand, usually, which is quite unusual now. I don't know of many writers who do that, but I love to write by hand. Why do I do this? Because my most important writing is written by hand. I mean my diary, my journal. Fundamentally, I am a writer of journal. A week ago, my journal was 50. So it was an anniversary in my small world. I started it on the 17th September 1973, when I wrote the first page. If you read that first page and the last page that I wrote a few days ago, you would notice that they are similar. The writing is similar, the way of making the phrases is similar, the way of thinking is similar. I did not evolve during those 50 years. I was like that. I was the same from I was 17 till now when I'm 67. My journal is in a way like Kafka's journal. So it includes all my inner life, starting with everything that happens to me, everything that I read. So I comment every book that I read, every dream that I dream at night. So I put down hundreds of dreams. There are hundreds of dreams in my journal. Usually when I wake up and remember a dream, I write it down in that morning, immediately. So it's very fresh. In Solenoid, I have about 40 dreams, which I write down, and then I try to make an analysis of each of them. They are real dreams. I picked them from my journal, so they are real. And many other things I write there, like Kafka did, the start of my short stories, some parts of my novels, and so on. So it's a very rich matter in that journal. And that journal is the trunk of my work, and from it all the other books spread like the branches and like the leaves and the fruits of my journal. And because I write journal almost every day, I'm very used to write by hand, because you cannot write journal on the computer. Only, it's an intimate thing. You only write it with your hand, very nicely, very slowly, with much patience, and in a beautiful way. It's like making a lice, you know, making something very, very nice and very beautiful. And this way I wrote my very, I can't find a word for them, my vital books. You know, in our body there are some vital organs and some not quite important organs, although all of them are important. You cannot live without your brain, without your heart, without your lungs, and so on. But it seems that you could live without your little finger. It's only an illusion, because no one wants to have this finger cut. If you have a finger cut, you don't feel you are complete. Something is missing from your from the scheme of your body. It's the same with the artist's works. Each and every one matters. I don't believe that the major books are more important than the minor books. All of them are important. I write a page of an article with the same love that I write a page of a poem or a novel. Everything is myself, is part of myself, is my blood in a way. So, I write by hand, and it's hard to believe, but I write in a continuous way. Only in the mornings I wake up, and then at 10 o'clock I start to write. Very few, 1 page or 1 page and a half, and it's enough for me. I only need a cup of tea, a cup of coffee on my table, and the door closed between me and the universe. So otherwise I can write anywhere. And I write by hand. I started to write blinding, for example, orbitor, segador, by hand, and I never stopped. For 14 years. I write for 14 years with great patience, very slow, and never erasing anything, never tearing a page, never crossing over a passage, never erasing a word. I had the feeling that the text existed before on each page, but it was covered with a white film, and I was only erasing the film from the text to liberate, to free the text. This is the feeling that I had. So if I had one of the notebooks with me, I could have showed you that each and every page is clean, is without any editing. And it's 1,400 pages. I wrote it, I took the notebooks with me everywhere. I wrote in Amsterdam, I wrote in Vienna, in Berlin, in Stuttgart, and I finished it in Budapest, because by that time in the 90s and 2000s, I had grants. I had grants in writers' grants in these capitals, and I also taught literature. I taught literature in some of these cities. And in the meantime, alone in a very small room, I was continuing to write at my novel. Another thing that is quite unusual is that I never plan anything. There are many writers who, before starting to write a book, make a sort of a synopsis or spreadsheet of what they are going to write. They have the subject in their mind. They know what they are going to write in the first chapter, in the second, in the third, and so on. They make notes. They make documentation, and so on. And after that, after these preliminary things, they just start to write. I don't do anything of it. I just start to write. I start to write without knowing what I'm going to say, what I'm going to write, what is my subject, what is the meaning of what I want to do. And I love to invent all the time. I love to write in a continuous process of inspiration, because it's about inspiration. When I don't feel inspired, I don't write. I only write when I feel that, well, there are some signs, like that aura that an epileptic has. He has a sort of a premonition. Sorry?
English or Spanish? What do you prefer? I want to ask you something, because you said we would ask.
Yeah, once he's finished. Sorry.
Okay. I didn't get you.
No, because she wanted to ask a question. I said, well, once you
Because you
finish.
said something that we can ask. Something.
Okay. Can you ask the question now?
Wait, I can wait, of course.
Yes. Okay.
Or English?
En español para que entiendan todos. Yo te escucho hablar y quizás estuve un poco... Sí. Te escucho hablar, quizás estuve un poco atrevida porque no pude no preguntarte. Dijiste que escribías cuando estabas inspirado y cuando se te escucha parece que fueras un hombre inspirado. Esta sensación que uno tiene cuando escucha a escritores en general del pánico de la hoja en blanco, esa angustia que muchas veces escritores describen de no saber para dónde ir, uno te escucha a vos y uno siente que sos como un hombre que no sufre la escritura, que la disfruta enormemente. Y justamente hablando de esto, que lo hacías cuando estabas inspirado, vivís bastante inspirado por lo que se te escucha. Y eso es una cosa muy extraña en un ser humano, ¿no? Es un privilegio.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this question. It is just like that. Just as you said, for me, writing is a great joy. It's always a great joy. I don't feel the panic that you were telling about. I feel only joy when writing. This is because I'm very little involved in what I do. I never consider myself the real author of what I'm doing. I will reiterate the parable that I used today in a previous talk. It's like at the races. There's a horse and there's a jockey. I feel that I'm only the jockey on the back of the horse. A jockey should be humble, should be very light, very small. The smaller he is, the better. Because not the joker wins the race, it's the horse. The horse is my mind. I trust my mind. I follow my mind. I don't want to shock my mind by using my cravache, for example. I leave my mind as free as possible and let her win the race. If possible, I said this once again, if possible, I wanted to levitate over my mind, not even touching it, at no point, so my mind can run without any burden and win the race. This is why I feel only happiness when I write, because the effort is not mine. I don't feel this effort. I feel only the pleasure of moving my estilografico, my pen, on the white page. I love the sound of the pen scratching the white page. I love making those circles and those lines of the writing and so on. So in the hour or an hour and a half while I write, I forget who I am. I forget where I live. I don't see anything around me. It's a sort of an auto-hypnosis. And I let my inner voice speak. I let it speak. And it speaks or not. If it doesn't speak, I go outside, I walk in the garden, I feed my cats, I do all kinds of other things. But if I hear this voice, I write under dictation, after dictation, you know? And this is how I wrote Orbitor. And at the end, I gave the book to my publisher, and my publisher knows how I write, knows that he can trust me, and doesn't make any changes, not even a comma. And there's in the publishing house where I publish in my country, there's an old sweet lady, a very nice lady, who has this speciality. She puts in the computer handwriting, because it's not only me in this situation. There are some older philosophers who also write by hand. So she has this job of putting the text in the computer, so the book could be published. And I did the same with another book of mine called Solenoid. Solenoid, or as you say, Solenoide, it's a book very different from Blinding, because Blinding is a horizontal book. I called it sometime a flying cathedral or a mystical butterfly. So it's a rhizomatic book. It extends in space. It has a very sensitive surface, but it stays at the surface. And from time to time, like the mushroom rhizomes make a mushroom, a coupole. Solenoid is a vertical act. It's vertical, it's mystical, it's metaphysical. It goes towards the heavens. It's like a rocket with many steps, with some steps that it has to leave behind, and only the capsule at the top breaks through the sky and goes beyond it. So Solenoid is an experience. It's an experience, a spiritual experience. For me, it has been for me, and I hope it could be for the readers who read it. And I wrote it also by hand and also without any planning. Although it is difficult to imagine how it's possible, this. I don't understand myself. But I started to write, I wanted to write another book. A book called My Anomalies, because it's about the anomalies of my mind. This is a different thing. I could keep you till tomorrow morning to tell you about my anomalies. They are very many and sometimes very annoying. But I started to write that book, and then at the middle of the book, I understood that I write some very different kind of novel. And the scene that determined me to change, to leave behind the first step of the rocket, is this one. Maybe some of you have already read this book and remember this scene. It happens in a school. There are two professors who fell in love with each other. It's the teacher of physics, the professor of physics, and the professor of Romanian, who is my character. And the woman professor of physics likes my character and wants to get closer to him, but she wants to make sure he's a good person. He's a real supportive person, and this is why she asked him the famous parable or moral dilemma of the house in fire. The house that burns. You know this dilemma. I didn't invent it myself. It's very common. So you have a house that burns, and you have inside two things: a baby, a little baby, and an extraordinary masterpiece. For example, a Vermeer or a painting of Leonardo da Vinci. You can only save one thing. What thing would you save? And my character doesn't hesitate at all and says, I would save the child. And she plays the advocate of the devil and continues. But if you would know that this child would become a serial criminal, a serial murderer who would make havoc around him, would bring only unhappiness in the world. And my character says, I would still save the child. But if you know that this child will become Adolf Hitler himself, and he will be the greatest murderer in history, and my character says, I would still save the child. One, because the child can feel pain, and the masterpiece cannot. And two, because there is no previsible future. No one can predict the future. The future is not something fixed and impossible to change. The future is what we do with the future. If Adolf Hitler, as a child, would benefit from more love from his parents and all the people who surrounded it, if he would have been raised in some other way, if he would get some other influences in his life, he could never become what he became. He could become a good person, a valuable person. So this is the way my character answered, and this changed my novel, transformed my novel from a purely aesthetical one to a moral one. And I think the value of Solenoid, as it is, I don't know if it's valuable, but if it has a value, the value consists in it. My character discovers the human solidarity, discovers what it's like to be a human, what it's like to care for the other persons. At first, he wanted to escape from the bad and dirty world we are living in, but when he had this possibility to escape alone, he gave up, because he did not want to save only himself in a selfish act. He wanted to die with all the people instead of escaping himself. So he discovered that between solitaire and solidaire, the famous Camus dilemma, you should choose the human solidarity. So the message of this book is, at the end, is a positive one. It consists in a single word, the word that all the thinkers and all the writers in this world, starting from St. Paul till John Lennon, always pronounced. It's the word is love. All you need is love. So my character discovers that to escape from this world is to have love, to give love and to take love. And I think this means that Solenoide is a work of maturity for me. From this point of view, I have more respect for it than for the much more elaborated blinding.
Shall we ask for another question?
Yes?
No, I'm sorry, no, we've run out of time.
Only